Hey guys, I hope you're all excited to talk about Chapter 16, Evolution, tonight. Just going to give you a brief introduction, and we will, work our way through the chapter as we carry on during the week. So let's go ahead and backtrack to characteristics of living things. Most of these we've talked about. See if you can pick out the ones that we've already talked about, especially over the course of first semester. Give you a second to think. You may want to pause. Spoiler alert. We've talked about cells. We've talked about being based on a universal genetic code. We've talked about obtaining and using materials and energy when we went through photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Talked about maintaining homeostasis. And now guess what we are on as a group? Change over time. This is what we know as evolution. So, when we start talking about evolution, we talk about the evidence for evolution and how we came up with the theory. And biological diversity is a great variety of living things, and this is when the question was first brought up about how we got all these organisms. Where did they all arise? Is there an explanation to account for their differences? And evolution is basically our answer. Evolution is a process by which modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms over a period of time. Charles Darwin, I'm sure you've heard of him before. He is the greatest contributor to the understanding of change over time. He was born in England in 1809. He went to school to become a doctor, but decided to become a minister instead. He was very interested in nature and joined the crew of the HMS Beagle as a naturalist in 1831 and sailed around the world, making observations, taking notes, logging everything that he saw. And anybody want to take a guess on what HMS stands for? Again, I'll go ahead and pause and give you a second to think about it. And if you don't want me to tell you the answer, you might want to pause the video now. And HMS, just for your own trivial knowledge, means His Majesty's ship. Alright, here's a couple pictures of Darwin's in his younger age here, and older, and a picture or a painting of the HMS Beagle that he sailed on. I also have here the map that you saw in your reading guide that takes you through his voyage. Very long voyage. He had lots of time to take observations, notes, compare them to each other, and attempt to come up with this hypothesis of the diversity of life. Alright, so during the trip, Darwin made numerous observations and collected evidence, as I've said. After studying the evidence and thinking about his observations, he proposed a hypothesis about how life changes over time. That hypothesis is now well supported by a huge body of well-researched and understood evidence and is called the theory of evolution. And I know all of you remember what a scientific theory is. It is a well-supported, well-tested hypothesis. And the way he came up with it is by noticing many patterns. If you take a picture, look at all of these pictures, all of the organisms in the pictures blend pretty well into their environment, which is obviously an advantage for them. Plants and animals like these are all well suited to the environment where they are living. That is why they survive and thrive in those areas. Argentina and Australia have similar environments, but have very different animals that are adapted to live in those regions, and that's basically how it is all over the world. Okay, he found many fossil remains, some of which resembled living organisms. He wondered why had these species disappeared? How are they related to the living species? And that's kind of his thought process through all of his works. Now, the Galapagos Islands are 1,000 kilometers west of South America, and they are a small group of islands, about 3/4 the land of the Hawaiian Islands. And they each had different climates, which ranged from hot, dry, and barren to very wet with great diversity. So this was a very prime site for Darwin to study different organisms in life and how they were able to adapt to different climates. He was very interested in giant tortoises like the one in the picture to the right. that varied predictably from island to island. He also studied iguanas, and he's also very famous for his finches that he studied with different shaped beaks depending on the food that was in their environment. Here is a diagram of the 3 different types of tortoises he encountered. Here you have Isabella Island tortoises. They have dome-shaped shell, and notice that they don't have very long necks compared to the Hood Island tortoises and the Pinta Island tortoises. So he could assume and probably discover that most of their food was low to the ground, because that's what those tortoises could reach. Now, Hood Island, you can see, has a very long net, allowing it to reach food that is very high off the ground. And then, of course, Pinta have vegetation probably that was mid-range. So after returning to England, Darwin began to wonder if animals living on different islands had once been members of the same species. Since they all look so much alike, ate similar things, this was a good question and a fair question to ask. Now, there are several ideas that shaped Darwin's thinking. At the time of his discoveries, things were changing and a different understanding of the world was coming to the front of science thinking. A couple of scientists named Hutton and Lyell were studying the age of the Earth, and this would be very helpful towards Darwin's thinking on evolution. The Earth is many millions of years old, and not just thousands as he had previously thought before, which would allow time for his evolution theory. And the processes that shape the Earth are still at work today. Now, there's also a scientist named Lamarck. He proposed that organisms acquired or lost certain traits because of their use or lack of use. These changes could be passed down to the offspring. He believed there was a tendency for complexity and perfection, that if you use the body in a new way, it would change, and that these acquired traits can be inherited. So one of his theories, or one of his pieces of evidence he tried to use, was a crab like this one, saying that if they use this claw more often, that it would get bigger, as shown here. Same thing here with the giraffes. If they reached up higher to get higher vegetation, their necks would get longer and therefore pass that trait of a long neck onto their offspring. So, we do know that that theory is untrue now, obviously, just because we use things or a lack of use. It does not mean necessarily that we are going to all of a sudden change and pass that on to our offspring. There is also Thomas Malthus. He was an English economist. He reasoned that if the human population continued to grow unchecked, then they will run out of living space and food for everyone. And when Darwin would wonder what happened to these species that he was finding in the fossil form, this kind of backed up the fact that everything is not going to be able to survive. Some things are going to overcome others. All right, and we are going to stop there. I will see you tomorrow. Make sure you go back and rewatch the video as needed and pause to get down good notes, and I will see you then.